Hey, what's up guys? So I've been a developer for about 15 years now in the game and interactive development space. But there is a time before I was a developer, BD as I like to call it. A very different life where I was more or less lost without any direction and stuck in a churn of horrible jobs, tedious, soul-destroying work. And I want to kind of share that journey with you and list out these jobs in the hope of inspiring some of you out there who might be in similar situations to what I was. When you watch dev tubers like myself, we're often veiled in this hyper competency and it looks like we came out of the womb coding, but that's far from the truth, at least in my case. So my first real job that I had to wake up for every day as a teenager was in a god-forsaken place, and I'm getting PTSD just thinking about it. So it was in a factory. I had to cut glass all day long, shoot nails into various objects, all while breathing in metal and sawdust. And this was all under the eyes of a tyrannical foreman who would constantly yell and berate us for working too slow. He had a real temper problem, and he would regularly chastise employees for talking amongst themselves about anything that wasn't task related. And in this way, it was not so dissimilar to a sweatshop. Every morning when I got up at about 6 a.m., I would absolutely wake up with a sense of dread. It truly was a miserable existence and quite the introduction to the working world. So after this fell apart, I needed to cruise for a while. So I tried to get a job at my local McDonald's. I had a few school friends at the time who were working there. Believe it or not, I didn't get the job because somehow the interviewer deemed me not qualified enough to flip burgers apparently. So, well, I mean, that's a hell of a thing to be rejected from. Imagine going to McDonald's in this day and age and asking for a job and them turning you down and saying, nah, man, it's not going to happen. But it was a blessing because instead I found a job at the local cinema, which was a pretty cool job for a teenager. You know, at the time they were showing movies like Universal Soldier, Titanic, Face Off, and all these great 90s movies. And, you know, I would work the candy bar and rip tickets. But there was a dark side to this job because I also had to clean the toilets every night. And all I can say to that is people are animals. And if you clean toilets in any public capacity, you'll quickly learn that. And after that, I was working in a fast food chicken shop, assembling burgers and working the grill. But the pay was so low that I had to take on another evening job as a pizza delivery driver, which I did until the engine in my crappy Nissan exploded and I had to quit that job. It was at this point that I realized that I need more than just like a casual job, but I need a career. But what was a career? I had no idea what I wanted to do at this point. And after a string of unsuccessful interviews, I eventually landed a job at like a mortgage broker as an assistant, which basically meant filling out paperwork, data entry, and calling people up who were late on their mortgage repayments. They would stack a pile of files on my desk every day higher than my head, and I would have to convert these applications into digital form. It was so tedious. And no matter how fast you worked, they would keep piling them up. You could never get on top of it. It was psychologically just very, very difficult to deal with. And eventually, after probably like 6 months or so, I just bailed. I was like, this is not a life I can live. After this, I did some random office jobs, each more horrible than the last. And I was just rat holing, you know. I was going nowhere fast, just digging random holes that didn't lead anywhere. And I was becoming so disgruntled with life. And I was like, well, what's next, you know? And I realized, look, I need to go study something. I need a proper education. Because after school, I didn't go into college or university like most kids do. Instead, I went straight into work. So I began studying IT and engineering. And I loved it so much. I started with an entry-level course where at the time I think they were teaching us how to install and format like Windows 98. The RAM they were showing us were SIMMs, which were single inline memory modules. They didn't even have the double-sided RAM yet. I think each stick was like 256 megabytes of RAM or something. Ridiculous. So after this, I went on to study various advanced courses until I eventually had a bachelor's degree under my belt. You know, I always had an interest in tech. Even prior to studying IT, I had built my own computer at the time from the local computer market. It's like a 486. And I'd always been a super nerd in my own way. And I spent much of my early years hanging out in gaming arcades and internet cafes, playing Tekken 2 and Warcraft 3, respectively. I just loved video games. Going back to when I was 11, I even created a design document for a game, which I actually sent to Nintendo. That's how much I loved it. But I didn't know there was a career in this. I was just doing this for the fun of it. At the time, the prospect of having a career in making games, it wasn't even conceivable. Like, it wasn't even on the table. Try to explain to your parents that you want to make games back in the 90s. You get the chocolate frogs slapped out of your mouth. This wasn't even a talking point. So I was now studying that which I had an interest in, but I still didn't have a career. So to support myself, I got a job as a bartender, pouring beers, cleaning ashtrays, and emptying poker machines was pretty much the name of the game. And I worked across various nightclubs in Sydney, and I saw a lot of stuff, man. It was a wild life during those years. I saw people have bar stools broken over their heads. I saw people get glassed in the face. And I remember just thinking, wow, that could have been me, because I was like meters away from this thing. So that was a real pathway to depravity. And I was glad to leave that world behind, because it was more or less, work all night, sleep much of the day, go to some classes, play RuneScape, play Morrowind, rinse, repeat. At this time, I had a massive MMO addiction too. I was playing a lot of these Korean MMOs. I think that's the student life though, It was about at this point in my life that I started to become exceptionally frustrated, because I had been studying for some time, the years were rolling on, and I was making all these cool Flash games, but I didn't know how to turn this into a career. I mean, how do you take this to that? I didn't understand how to transition to that next step. And I had no one to rely on. Though I had a home to go to, I wasn't there much. It wasn't really the place I wanted to be, let's put it that way. I had a pretty tumultuous upbringing and more or less had to rely on myself. And thankfully, through my own persistence, I managed to find and secure a job as an intern for a local advertising agency who specialized in making games and interactive content for brands. So that was my first exposure to the real world of development. And I quickly realized that there is a big difference between hobby development and professional development. Just everything is different, the standards, the workflows, how you approach projects. I've got a video I made some time ago where I talk in detail about that job. I'll link that down below if you want to watch that. But over these next few years, I became so intensely obsessed and focused on my craft. I had finally found not only something that I enjoyed, but that I was actually good at. And the rest is more or less history. And more recently, I've become a DevTuber so that I can pass on these stories to the next generation and hopefully inspire some of those who are coming up as I was. It's funny because since I was a child, I was always interested in these things. Making games, designing games, and technology. It was right under my nose. But instead of pursuing that, I would, find random directions like mortgage broker assistant and whatever, And it's partly, I guess, expectations in one sense, or just not realizing that. I guess part of it is you think a job should not be fun, I guess, when you're younger, and you're like, oh, this is my hobby, surely that's not incompatible with a job. Nobody really got it, and people still don't really get it. My mother still asks me, so what do you do exactly? And after giving her an in-depth explanation many times over, at this point, I've just kind of given up, and I was like, don't worry, Mum, I'm happy and I'm doing the things that I enjoy doing. Development really did change my life. More so that I could explain in this video, and then maybe I'll do a follow-up in the future where I'll get into more of the details of that. But in a nutshell, it provided me the discipline and focus that I needed. It's as if I always knew what I wanted, but I had to run the gauntlet of horrible experiences to discover that. You know, sometimes you have to wade through the things you hate so that the things you love will emerge. But you see, all those experiences, the good and the bad, notably the bad, are what build character and strength and work ethic, importantly. So if you're in a situation that mirrors those I've described in any way, know that there are lessons that you are learning along the way, and one day you will look back with fondness, because you have to temper yourself like a blade. You have to build that strength and resilience. And those who constantly take shortcuts and never eat the shit, they will never see that growth. And that's just the fact of it. So whatever your situation, know that it is part of your story. But as long as you are heading towards a goal, you're oriented in the right direction, it's inevitable that you will reach it if you keep persisting forward. It's really a matter of time. And for some of us, it takes longer than others. And we might even run out of that time. But we have to try, right? Life is finite. It's something we all know, but we take for granted. But when you reach a certain age, you become acutely aware of it. You start to feel the intensity. And for many people, by the time they realize how little they have left, it's often too late. There is a concept known as the law of diminishing intent, which states the longer you wait to take action, the less likely you will be to take that action. So seize the day, start taking those steps forward. So anyways, guys, I hope you've enjoyed this video, and leave a comment down below and tell me a little bit about your stories or some of the crappy jobs you maybe have done. I think it'll be an interesting read for myself and others in the community. All right, guys, thanks again. I'll see you in the next one. Bye.